I've had my eye on Elden Ring ever since it came out, but have never actually sat down to play it. While the entire world seemed to be dying beneath yellow trees, I was facing robot dinosaurs in Horizon Forbidden West and generally trying to save money. But with the DLC out, the lands between have been calling to me once again. No more could I sit and watch everyone enjoy death so much. I had to join in and find out why getting sliced by soldiers and stomped by trolls is just so fun. However, my experience with Souls games is seriously limited. I previously only played with friends, swapping controllers on death, and even that was nearly a decade ago. Something that's scary for so many reasons. So coming into Elden Ring, I decided a little help was needed. But how much can online guides actually aid you for a Souls-like? Could reading a Reddit thread really make my life easier? And are there tips that genuinely improve the experience of playing? I've set out to find out, and if you're heading into the lands between for the very first time, hopefully this will let you know if some swatting beforehand is actually needed.
You are very warm.
I wasn't originally planning to go into this looking up tips. I wanted to settle in at first, at least getting to grips with controls and vibes before filling my brain with stats and quests. But as soon as I was faced with character creation, I knew that was over. Picking a class felt like a hugely important decision. I already knew some magic would be helpful. Keeping my distance and blasting a particularly tough enemy when a fight got too hard sounded perfect, but at the same time, I still wanted to dive into a fight when the mood struck me. However, I was still happy to let the internet totally sway my preferences, so spent a bunch of time looking around for the best starting class for a new player. And, well, unsurprisingly, I guess no one can actually agree what that is. Some people insist on samurai for the katana, others say wretch to give you a clean base to build from, others just throw in things they thought were fun. Turns out the best starting class very much depends on how you want to play. As someone that wanted both melee and magic and wasn't sure which of those they'd lean more into, the prisoner made the most sense. A sword, a staff, and some simple stats to build on. Plus, I had this cute open shirt that was actually a real slave if you ignore the ugly helmet I had. I'd say when looking for advice here, have an idea of what kind of combat you'd enjoy, from ranged spellcasting to sneaky dagger wielding. Either base it on how you play other games or how you want to tackle difficult Elden Ring enemies, and then look through articles from there. There's no definitive answer, but in the end, I'm pretty happy with my pick and definitely benefited from some reading to make an educated guess on who to play. So far, tips 1, random picking, nil. After the typical pinkifying of my character and the tutorial caves, I was finally let loose onto the rolling hills and golden trees of Limgrave. I was excited to explore, scared to meet anything, and ready to get used to the world for at least a moment before I slunk back to the comforting embrace of Reddit threads and guide content. I wanted to try the game a little first and then see what difference all the tips would actually make. It was the control part of my experiment, and by the end of all of this, I hope to face, and tips be merciful, defeat my first big boss. If I did that, then I could theoretically class the tips as helpful, but if I managed to do it alone and never looked anything up, then maybe studying all sorts of tricks wouldn't actually be worth the time. So, I started out playing by following my heart, which was mostly led by playing football with various debris. So far, the glowing rune skulls seem the best candidates for a kickabout, but that is a quest I'll continue for the rest of the game. Between kicks, I tried to fight anything I saw to suss out my skills and found generally mixed success. Some things were clearly much too hard for me, and luckily I could mostly leave them. However, that did actually become an issue later on. My quest for the best football took me north, and I reached a catacomb with a grotty watchdog mini-boss. Thanks to blasting it from afar with magic, I managed to kill the janky beast, but that didn't really feel like a win from having a handle on combat, and more a mix of lucky rolls and strong magic. The prisoner pick was definitely paying off though, allowing me to avoid direct combat as I was still very much getting used to my sword and shield. But with at least that one success, I felt I could take on anything, as long as I could blast it with magic. So with a few more kickabouts, I found myself aimlessly wandering to the Gatehouse camp. I happily cleared the individual enemies, sneaking my way through the crumbling walls to take them down one by one until I was faced with a tough knight in the middle. Here, my real test begun. By the time I cleared the camp, after 10 minutes, I take one hit from him and die, no matter what I try to do. I spent longer here than I'd like to admit, feeling as if this was small fry compared to the big dog I fought, and believing I should be able to face it. But eventually, I accepted I needed to rethink my strategy, and that meant walking away from the fight to finally look up some tips. And turns out, by doing that, I was already on the road to learning one of the most important things when playing Elden Ring. So, turning from my computer screen to my phone screen, I started reaching out for help. My first question was, where should I be going? I'd walked aimlessly and was now stuck on an enemy, so I wanted to know if perhaps there was a better direction to take first. I chatted to some friends who love the game, and one of them directed me to the very bottom of the map. There was a promised island with easier enemies to grind. It meant going in the opposite direction, but I was actually ready to slip back into the shallow end after drowning for a good few hours. Plus, they made me level up, which I had been completely ignoring because in typical Souls-like fashion, that wasn't thrown in my face. While I was busy killing things, I hadn't actually been considering the runes I collected. So I sat down to level up. I picked Vigor after a quick Google as that made the most sense. Understanding your stats is a very helpful thing to do when choosing which numbers to buff, so once again, a little reading here did actually help. At the same time as this though, I picked up my new favourite toy, the Spectral Steed Whistle. Suddenly, with my magical pony, the world didn't seem so scary. So I trotted south, exploring as I went, and started to get to grips with more of the combat. After a little taste of Barbie horse adventure with Torrent, I eventually arrived at the Weeping Peninsula. I faced a deceptively easy golem and was ready for a smooth ride through Castle Morn. Through sneaking and avoiding large crowds of enemies, I managed to handle the castle okay and found myself in my first proper boss fight. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I was through the smoke and getting smashed into the floor before I even realized what was happening. The Leona Misbegotten fell impossibly fast, attempt after attempt, and I felt like I was making zero progress. I couldn't dodge his attacks, I could barely get a hit in. I stopped playing for the day and for the first time felt worried about going back. Had I finally reached my wall? Was the game just too hard for me? And this is where the epiphany I was close to earlier finally happened. If something was too difficult, I should just walk away and come back later. There's no reward for smashing your head against a tough enemy over and over. I fast travelled back to Limgrave, and the next day I decided it was time to really get into some of these tips. From where to rune farm and level up, to weapons to seek out, to all the basic knowledge I should have when playing Elden Ring for the first time. And lo and behold, a tip that kept coming up was that this is an open world. You can walk away whenever you want. I think having this on board earlier instead of wasting time punishing myself on hard fights would have really helped my progress this early on in the game. Clearly, I was better off leaving the boss fight for when I was better prepared. I was encouraged to seek out the Bestial Sanctuary for rune farming, but little did I realize this wasn't actually the answer to my Google search of early rune farming, and just a general guide. One taste of that and I knew it wasn't right. However, along the path to seeking out D, Hunter of the Dead, for my teleport, I discovered new locations, took down new enemies, and generally got more comfortable in fights. And even if my rune farming spot didn't work out, my curiosity to see everything around me already gathered some decent levels. From there, a lot of the starting tips are actually things I naturally did, either on purpose or completely accidentally. Every guide recommends getting Torrent and the Summoning Bell ASAP, and I picked up both just by playing for a few hours. I didn't actually make use of the summons till my second boss fight, but God was I happy to have them there when I needed them. I'm definitely a fan of shields, and honestly this tip was mostly just a reminder to properly use mine. And on this note, experimenting with equipment and weapons came up a couple of times when I was researching. The only way to work out what you like in a fight is to try new things, but other than a couple of tussles with a whip, because obviously I had to try that, I've pretty much stuck to my sword and shield. I might continue to explore Limgrave and try out different weapons another day, but I'd grown comfortable with my setup. I was happy that I could just kill enemies now, so starting from ground zero again just wasn't that appealing yet. Although I do kind of want to master the whips right now. A Catwoman build is calling me. One piece of equipment advice I did seek out was a better weapon. I like my sword, but clearly it wasn't the best one, and it didn't take me long to see that the twin blade is a very good early game thing to pick up. One wall jump later and I was armed with some extra power in my swings, and it felt great. I was taking down trolls, soldiers lay in my wake. I knew it was time to keep along my Stormhill path and face my second big boss. It was time to fight Marget. I'd heard a lot of comments on how tough this fight was, so I felt a little nervous going in, but at the same time excited to tackle another boss after significant practice from my last one. This was my chance to see if the tips had paid off, if I'd actually got good practice in, and whether I was able to progress in the game. So I stepped onto the bridge, controller gripped tightly in hand, eyes locked on those twisted horns, knowing that everything rode on what happened next. So obviously I died, and again, sometimes in dumb ways, but gradually I started to learn how he moved. I dodged attacks, I landed hits, I was wearing him down. I really felt like I was getting into the fight, and this was completely alone. No summons, no NPC aid. However, after consistently getting to half a health bar but nearing the end of the day, I decided it was time to call in a little help. With a friendly sorcerer by my side and the first taste of a summons with a pack of wolves, the fight quickly turned and I did it. I killed my first boss. As I soaked up this amazing moment, there was only one thought on my mind. Had the tips done this? Would I have been able to succeed without copious research first? Well, yes and no. Researching which class to play as, how leveling up works, and other specific information like this did really help. Without Souls game experience, this kind of thing is good to know, but generally a lot of the starting tips boil down to explore, try, practice. There is no better tip than just having a go at the game. The more you play, the better you'll get, and the more you'll work out. The lands between can be weird and scary, but the only way to overcome those fears is to face them. You need to run up and hit the big monster to see what happens. You need to get lost and discover new areas. It's helpful having some guidance when you're stuck, but doing it on my own was always better. If I'd spent my first 10 or so hours going from point to point because a list told me to, I wouldn't have enjoyed myself nearly as much. The best times I had in Elden Ring were because I stumbled upon something. My combat improved because I threw myself into any fight I saw. I took the time to see what was down each new valley, to see what was hiding on the beach, to see everything I could discover. Tips certainly have their place, but I agree with most of the lists that just tell you to go out and try things. Understanding basics like leveling up and how the UI work are certainly helpful, but otherwise, just jump on your horse and get lost. The rest will gradually make sense. There are still a lot of things I need to work out with Elden Ring. Crafting, guard countering, and buying a torch are all on my list from reading through tips and guides, but generally I'm excited to continue exploring in my own time, seeing what secrets I can uncover along the way. I'm sure I'll come back to the odd Reddit thread when a new area is stumping me and I need advice, or at least read some venting from other players so I feel less alone, but I can definitely say tips will only get you so far. I'm glad I read up on some stuff as a Souls-like newbie, but I'm also happy I took the time to just have a go myself. So read when you feel like you need it, but don't get bogged down in seeking advice on everything. Elden Ring may want you to think it's unforgiving, but you've just got to get to know it. So, are you stepping into the lands between for the very first time, or do you have beginner's tips? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed, subscribe for more on Elden Ring and the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, or head to Eurogamer.net. I'm already itching to get stuck back into Stormvale Castle, so I'm heading off, and I'll see you in the next one.